Welcome to the ITFreeTraining video on advanced NTFS permissions. Previously, I looked at the 6 basic permissions. Advanced permissions allow the administrator to divide these 6 basic permissions up into smaller parts to give more control to the administrator. Shown here are the 14 advanced permissions that are available. In older versions of Windows, these were referred to as special permissions. 13 of them are available for files and folders, while 1 is only available at the folder level. Depending on whether the permission is applied at the folder or file level will affect what it does. For example, the first permission, list folder read data, when used at the folder level will allow the files in a folder to be seen. But if it is applied to a file, it will allow the file to be read. In most cases, the 6 basic permissions will be enough for the average administrator. In some cases, the administrator may need additional control over permissions. When this is the case, they may need to configure advanced permissions. The 6 basic permissions map to the 14 advanced permissions. As you can see, when you select the read permission, you are in fact selecting 4 advanced permissions. These are list folder read data, read attributes, read extended attributes, and read permissions. If you select the basic permission list folder contents, this also selects all the read permissions and adds traverse folder execute file. List folder contents is different than the other basic permissions, as it only applies at the folder level and does not affect files. If I were to select the basic permission read and execute, this would also include all the permissions above it. If I were to select the basic permission write, note that it would select the 4 basic permissions on the right. You can start to see how basic and advanced permissions relate to each other. If I were to select modify, notice that all the permissions above it are also selected. This brings us to the next question. Can individual advanced permissions be selected? The answer is yes. For example, I could select the delete permission by itself. Although this is possible, it would mean that you would not be able to see what is in the folder to delete. For this reason, if you wanted to give the user only the ability to delete files, you would probably give them the list folder read data advanced permission as well. This would give the user the ability to see the files in Windows Explorer so they can delete them. I will now look at an example of how to use advanced permissions. In this example, I will configure a folder to allow the user to read, write, and execute applications. However, they cannot delete any files. To do this, I will open Windows Explorer and then create a new folder which I will call Docs. If I now right-click Docs, I will select Properties, and then from Properties, I will select the tab Security. The permissions that are listed here have been inherited from the parent folder, so I will first remove these. To do this, I press the Advanced button and then press the button Disable Inheritance. Windows will then ask if the existing permissions are going to be kept or removed. In this case, I will select the second option and have the existing permissions removed. In the real world, you would most likely leave the administrators and system user in the permissions list and give them full control. In this case, I will only use the administrators group. Since the administrators group is the owner and I am logged in as an administrator, I can change the permissions of the file at any time, even if I do not have access. You will notice that with the way the permissions were set up, even though I removed the permissions, there is still one entry left for the administrators. With that permission selected, I will now press the Edit button and make changes to it. You can see on the left-hand side all the basic permissions that have been configured. In most cases, the basic permissions will be enough, but for this example, they will not be. To show this, I will tick the permission for Read and Write. If I now select the option for Show Advanced Permissions, this will show the 14 advanced permissions. You will notice that the delete permission is not ticked, which is what we want. However, also notice that the option for Traverse Folder Execute File has not been ticked. This means that executables in the folder will not be able to be run, which is not what we want in this case. If I now select the option for Show Basic Permissions, this will change the view to show the 6 basic permissions. In this case, I will tick the tick box Modify. If I now select the option Show Advanced Permissions, notice that this time the option for Traverse Folder Execute File is enabled, which will allow executables to be run. This is what we want. However, notice that Delete has also been ticked, which is not what is required. So essentially, using basic permissions will not give the desired results of allowing read, write, and execute, but disabling the ability for files to be deleted. You can see that using basic permissions has not given the required results. In order to achieve the required results, I will clear the permission, delete. If I now press OK, I will be taken back to the list of permissions. Notice at the top, the option Permissions is configured to apply to this folder only. This permission will currently only affect the folder, not the files in the folder or subfolders. I cannot change this in the interface, so the only way around this is to press the Add button to add more permissions. First, I will select the option at the top, Select a Principal, and then enter in Administrators. This will determine which user or group the permissions will be created for. In this case, permissions will be created for the Administrators group. I will next select the basic permissions Modify, and then from Advanced Permissions, deselect the Delete permissions like I did previously. Notice below the permissions there is a tick box. Only apply these permissions to objects and/or containers within this container. If this tick box is ticked, then these permissions will only apply to this folder and objects in that folder. If I now press OK and go back to the previous screen, notice that there is still only one entry. However, the Applies To option has changed from Folder Only to This Folder, Subfolders, and Files. You will notice that when you add or remove permissions, sometimes extra lines will be added and other times they will be removed. Windows will display the list the best way it can based on the permissions that have been set. If I now exit out of here and go to Windows Explorer, I have the Windows Help file executable that I will now move into the Docs folder and will run it. Note that it will run without a problem. If I close Windows Help, notice that I can create a text document in the Docs folder. I can also open the file and edit it. Once the changes are made, I can close the file and save the changes. Notice, however, that if I select the file and attempt to delete it, I get an error message saying access has been denied. So the permissions have worked. They have allowed read, write, and execute. However, deletes have been prevented from occurring. If you attempt this kind of setup in your company, test it with the applications that you want to use it with. Software like Microsoft Office will often require the delete permission when saving files. This is because it uses temporary files in the saving process. Before finishing this video, I will have a quick look at each of the advanced permissions. This will help you decide if or how you want to use them. The first permission is List Folder Read Data. If you assign this permission to a folder, this allows the user to see a listing of files and subfolders in that folder. If the permission is assigned to a file, it gives the user the ability to read the file. The next permission is Read Attributes. This allows the user to read attributes of the file. As shown here, the basic attributes are found in the General tab. These include Read Only and Hidden. If you do not have the View attribute permission, the details on this tab will not be available. The next permission is Read Extended Attributes. Extended attributes allow applications to add their own attributes to a file. In Windows, this is pretty rare, and a feature generally used in alternative operating systems. The next permission, Read Permissions, allows the user to read the permissions of a file or folder. If you open the properties of a file, this is essentially the Security tab. This permission essentially allows a user to read what permissions are assigned to a file or folder, but they are not able to make changes. The next permission is Traverse Folder Execute File. This allows a user to move between folders and, when applied to a file, allows them to execute a file. To demonstrate this one a bit better, I will open Windows Explorer. If I now open the Docs folder, I will create a folder and call it Subfolder. Next, I will move the Windows Help executable into this folder. If I now open the Properties of the Docs folder, I will select the Security tab and then press the Advanced button. The only permission listed is for administrators. I will select this and then press Edit. I will next press Show Advanced Permissions and then press the button Clear All and tick the permission Traverse Folder Execute File, making it the only permission that is configured. I will now exit out of here and go back to Windows Explorer. You will notice that if I attempt to open the Docs folder, I will get an error message telling me access denied, so there appears to be no way to run the Windows executable. However, notice that if I enter in the path manually, I can run the executable. So, the Traverse Folder permission allows the user to pass through folders to access files and documents. However, it does not give them the ability to read or even see what files are in that folder. If the Execute File permission is applied, this permission gives the user the ability to run executables. The next permission is Create Files, Write Data. This permission gives the user the ability to create files, and if applied to a file, gives them the ability to write to the file. The next permission is Create Folders, Append Data. At the folder level, it allows subfolders to be created under that folder. The Append Data to a File permission is an interesting one. It allows data to be written to the end of a file, but does not allow data to be rewritten in the file. This would be a good permission to use for a log file, as you do not want to overwrite what is there already, only add to the file. The problem with this permission is that the software that is writing to the file needs to open the file in append mode. If the software does a standard open command of the file will not be able to be appended to unless the write permission is included as well. For this reason, if you plan to remove the write permission and use only the append data permission, you would need to test your software to ensure that it will work correctly with this permission. The next permission is Write Attributes. This essentially allows the user to make changes to the attributes found on the General tab. For example, changing the file to hidden. The next permission is Write Extended Attributes. This allows applications to create their own custom attributes and write them to a file or folder. This is mostly used in third-party operating systems and not used in Windows very often. The next permission is Delete. This simply allows the user to delete files or folders. The next permission, Delete Subfolders, can only be applied to folders. It allows the user to delete files and folders in the folder. If this permission is configured, the user is able to delete the files in the folder even if the delete permission has not been configured on that file. The next permission is Change Permissions. This essentially allows the user to change permissions shown on the Security tab. Having this permission essentially means the user could change the permissions, giving themselves all the other permissions if they want to, but it is what it is. The next permission is Change Ownership. This allows the user to change the owner of a file or folder. As shown here, at the top, the owner is listed as the administrators group. The owner of the file has the ability to change permissions even when they do not have access to the file or folder. It is a backdoor in Windows to prevent a user from removing access to one of their files or folders by mistake. So, essentially, if a user has this permission, they can change the owner to themselves and then change the permissions on the file or folder. The last permission is Full Control. This permission gives the user access to all the other permissions. You can see that you can get some interesting results from using advanced permissions. However, in most cases, the administrator will be able to achieve what they want using standard permissions. Thanks for watching this video from ITFreeTraining. I hope to see you in other videos from us. Until then, thanks for watching. I hope to see you in the next video.